Welcome to Philosophy15. I'm Scott Aiken.
And I'm Robert Talese.
These are 15-minute videos with two philosophy professors talking unscripted about issues in the profession, issues in philosophy, philosophical topics that are bothering us. At the very least,
get our goat.
Yes, that have prompted us to some critical discussion. So Rob and I were talking a little bit earlier about some political epistemology and some issues in it. And one of the things that sort of came up was something that initially we wanted to call the problem with political epistemology. Maybe we'll say a problem to be a little bit less controversial, but at the very least a problem in political epistemology. Rob, what's the problem that's getting our goat today?
Oh.
What's a problem that's getting our goat today?
That's a good right. That's exactly it. So let's maybe start by saying something about what political epistemology is. So there are people running loose in the world, unsupervised, with a lot of very responsible, competent training in epistemology, which is the theory of knowledge, who have relatively recently discovered that politics, or perhaps politics in the familiar context of constitutional democratic societies, is in part an epistemic affair. So when you think about just ordinary democratic practices, voting, debating, discussing, speech making, talking to one another, criticizing some law or some action that officials have taken in our name, it looks as if it's very, very difficult to make good sense of what we do routinely in the course of our democratic citizenship without without employing certain kinds of epistemic concepts, like the concept of a reason, or the concept of an argument, or the concept of a debate, or the concept of a judgment. If you think that votes, even if you think that votes are expressions of your desires, they still invoke judgments about what your desires are, how to prioritize them, which desires are in play with respect to some particular decision point, so on and so forth. So it's very, very hard to make good sense of what we're doing when we are doing democracy without invoking concepts that look like the currency, look like they're items within the currency with which epistemologists do their thing.
We're welcome over here, said the epistemologist.
Yeah, good.
And notice, by the way, that this is a response to an old Platonic worry about democracies generally, which is, hey, democracies are places where reasons don't matter, and reasons are really bad.
That's right.
This is the reason why we need philosopher kings, and so on. Democracies are places where reason goes to die. And a good deal of this democratic theory is supposed to be a kind of response to that old Platonic concern about democracies being places where knowledge is maybe not just irrelevant, but maybe even bad for you.
That's right. And one other, I think, dimension of this is that a lot of the recognition in more contemporary time of the sort of distinctively epistemic edge to constitutional democratic politics and constitutional democratic practices is the result of the failure, and I think it's correct to call it a failure, of well-developed trends within academic democratic theory to respond to Plato by simply denying that there's anything like judgment, reason, wisdom, correctness in democratic politics.
We'll be a bigger skeptic than you, buddy.
That's right. So part of the reigning sort of approach to democratic theory, from the middle of the 20th century, maybe a little bit prior to that onward, had sort of understood democracy as a mechanism for filling offices that had a competitive market-like sort of structure to it, where the people, the citizenry, the electorate, wasn't judging, thinking, reasoning. They were merely sort of expressing
and investing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It was a kind of sort of, it was like choosing off a menu, between vanilla and chocolate and strawberry ice cream, which didn't seem to invoke anything that would be responsive to reasons and evidence and arguments and facts and all the rest. And so it looked as if on the sort of what's sometimes called the traditional elitist, sometimes it's called realist model of democracy, it's like democracy is just the mechanism for transferring power among an elite class, politicians, in a way that preserves stability, that is connected to various kinds of social goods that don't. The democratic process is not supposed to represent the will of the people or express the public good or any of those Rousseauvian style things. It's simply a way in which the electorate can exercise what's sometimes called an irrational veto about who will rule them. Now, we won't get into there. It looks like there's all kinds of problems with that view.
Yes.
And even you can start seeing that once you say, oh, well, wait a minute, if democracy just is this method, this process, this mechanism by which the electorate can exercise a veto, can vote the bastards out or whatever, like, already looks like that's
it's going to be something reason responsive.
Stuff. Yeah, it already looks like
there's a reason why they're voting them out. They're bastards.
That's exactly right. And even when you say that they can exercise a veto, it does look like
they're opting in,
introduced something like a public opinion, a majority will, a general will. It looks like you've introduced the kind of thing that this approach to democratic theory was supposed to avoid. Okay.
So now we've got the positive epistemic program.
Good. Which tries to turn Plato on his head in a way and tries to say with some degree of strength. I mean,
that's the challenge.
So some contemporary democratic theorists say things like, only democracies can be wise. They say things like the Platonic criticisms of democracy are all about individuals being foolish. Turns out that Aristotle had a version of this thought. Turns out that you can have a bunch of foolish individuals who nonetheless can compose, can form a group that is wiser than a much smaller group of experts. Some people hold that super high, like democracy is the path to collective intelligence. This is a Dewey and Mill had a view like
kind of a culture program with that.
Hayek had a slightly different version of this. Then there's other kinds of other kinds of views, more sort of flat, straightforwardly deliberativist views that just say, well, forget about wisdom and collective intelligence. It's like, well, democracy is about sort of trading reasons and doing our best to be epistemically responsible with respect to collective decision making. And wouldn't it be ridiculous to flip a coin? What's objectionable about flipping a coin? That looks fair.
That looks fair.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So, and we could start running through a lot of different.
And these are all looking very optimistic.
Yeah. Good.
And so all these optimistic programs as responses to Plato were like, hey, we're doing better than when you thought, than our sort of Athenian friend thought that we were going to do. But then it does look like there are problems that emerge for these democracies as they do their epistemic thing. We say, hey, we're doing epistemic stuff, but the thing is that when we do epistemic stuff, we mess it up.
Good.
And so that's one of the main sites for a good deal of contemporary political epistemology.
Good. Now, here's the worry, right?
Yes.
Okay. Here's the worry. Like a lot of sort of newfangled, is that too negative sounding? Like newly minted sort of programs in philosophy.
Nascent.
Good. That's another way to put it. That's a nicer way to put it. So we've got political epistemologists running around. There are multiple edited collections of new and interesting papers on political epistemology. Some of us contribute to them regularly. And it's all, we're not criticizing any particular theorist's work within this domain.
Keep it up, y'all.
Yeah, keep going. Here's the worry, and I think this is more than a worry. I think it's a problem. I think that a lot of flies under the banner of political epistemology winds up being applied epistemology, where the site of the application is politics. It's like applied ethics, where we've got our normative ethical theories, and then we just think about
some cases,
some particular domain in which moral phenomena arise. Doctor-patient relations and, economic systems, and before you know it, we've got sort of ethical theorizing about normative ethics, and then we just go and find places to kind of plug it in and start
got the right
talking,
variables, and we know how to derive that.
Good.
Okay. So that's applying your ethics.
Good. Here's the worry.
Okay. So
And
now an
maybe-
applied epistemology version. of
Yeah.
this.
So, a lot of the tools of the epistemologist, including the social epistemologist, are aimed at either individual or collective belief forming, belief revising, belief updating processes. And that's really the focus of the concern is, truth seeking, getting the right answers, responding well to your evidence, and all the rest.
That's the epistemology game. Come on now.
That's all good. Once we introduce politics, though, there's an additional
got an orthogonal element
phenomenon
to this.
that looks like it at least needs to come more to the forefront. I'm not saying they can't bring it to the forefront. It just looks like it needs to come to the forefront. When we're doing democratic politics, and we're at some collective decision point, and some policy has to be made, and we've got some collection of options. Our question as citizens can't simply be, in some flat-footed sense, what's the best policy? Because there's this additional, and I think often autonomous, freestanding, distinct question. Which of the policies that are available to us is it permissible for me to impose on others who are my equals? That looks ineliminably moral. It's normative in an ineliminably distinct register from the epistemic normative register. So think, for example, here's one very, very quick example.
Yeah.
Think about jurors. Now, being a member of a jury looks like it's, whatever account we might want to give of its virtues, or what it means, what it is to be a good or a reliable or a competent or an admirable juror. That story is going to be in part epistemic. You've got to be attentive. You've got to, think about the evidence. You've got to be a judge of character. I mean, there are all kinds of ways in which what goes into being a good juror is an epistemic, is properly understood in epistemic terms. But here's the other thing. It's not the juror's job simply, or in some flat-footed way, to discover the truth about whether the person who's been accused, in criminal case, the person who's been accused of the crime did it.
Your
That's
job
not
is just the admissible evidence that's in front of
This
them.
is exactly right. The juror's job is to figure out whether a certain burden of proof has been met.
Yes.
That's the truth that they're interested in. They're still interested in a truth, but the truth that they're interested in is
As
constrained.
Quad juror.
Quad juror is constrained by a certain kind of moral consideration about how to justify state punishment. And that seems like the burden is on the state to not merely convince you that the accused has done it, but to make the case that the accused has done it that satisfies a very, very specific and demanding evidentiary criterion. So, it's not the juror's job to give any weight whatsoever to a confession that was acquired illegally, even if you think that the confession was
Even if it's excellent evidence.
even if it's perfectly good evidence. So you want to say, wait a minute, there's this extra dimension that has to come into political epistemology. The role-specific, and I would say constitutively morally normative responsibilities of democratic citizens to one another. And so truth-seeking and reason-weighing and deliberating, these are all have to be understood within the context of the question of, for the purpose of conducting politics among equals. And I would I would invite, Last point, promise. I would invite people to go look at the political epistemology literature and see how infrequently that
role-specific evidential duties. I think that there's one extra part to this, which is that we've got the narrowing of duties that happens in liberal democracies. I think that there's also a sort of one other temptation. We've got the special restrictions that need to be assessed whenever we talk about this. But there are also special temptations in liberal democracies, where on the one hand we've got this highly individualized, hey, because your vote counts and you need to have a view, then you need to be able to figure all these sorts of things out. And you need to have a view because you need to vote and you've got responsibilities qua voter to think things through, but don't take anybody's word for it.
Yeah,
and
do your own research.
And so there are specific kinds of errors that we can make given our role-related duties as citizens that call us out and that create new kinds of puzzles for ourselves.
I think that's right.
That because we've got these specific role responsibilities as citizens, certain epistemic duties come out, and it just turns out that that because those epistemic duties either come out or we think they come out, we're not particularly good at them.
Right. And those role-specific political epistemic responsibilities can bear fraught relations to our non-role specific epistemic duties.
That's right. So you have to ignore certain evidences whenever you're a juror.
That's a very good example.
You've got other cases where it looks like you're overwhelmed with evidence as a voter, but nevertheless still have to make a vote.
That's right. Good.
Okay.
Philosophy 15, folks.